Sorry, folks. We had some technical difficulties that we had to work out. Without further ado, this is Just After Dark. And we're going to open up like I like to do. I wrote a song about young Matthew Hoy, and I want to open up with this song, and then we'll get cracking.
Yeah. This one's for Matthew Hoy. A soul taken too soon. If you know something, it's time to speak up. Your silence just protects the guilty and will haunt your soul. Late one night on Bunker Hill, the truth floated away like smoke in the air. They found the car burning, but nobody cared. They took a look inside and saw a body in flames. Now Matthew Hoy is more than just a name. Rumors swirled like smoke from a scene. Did he get jumped over love or over something unseen? There was talk of a girl, jealousy and worse, who propped him up in the seat like he was taking a ride in a hearse. Someone with a fuse watched it catch and then tried to erase every sign of the truth and every scar on his face. But justice don't sleep and all lies leave a trace. Somebody is out there and silence can't erase what happened to Matthew or the smell of that place. If you know what happened on Bunker Hill, don't let Matthew just fade like a chill. He was more than a rumor and more than a name. Let the truth break free and put an end to this game. Someone out there holds the key. Open up the lock and set his spirit free. You can lie, you can run, but you can never hide. This is Justice After Dark, and I'm keeping his memory alive. April, they say, might be part of the pain. Perfume twisted in the shadows of shame. Was it jealousy, rage, or a moment gone black? Now a mother can't sleep and just wants her son back. He had dreams, friends, and plans to build. Now he's ashes on wheels. Was that really your will? To whoever was there and whoever remains quiet. Your silence is violence and your secret is a riot. We ain't forgetting, no, this ain't staying cold. I'm turning up the heat until the truth gets told. Matthew ain't just a case or a post to share. He's a heartbeat lost and what's fair is fair. Look in the mirror, can you live with the lie? While mother lights candles and ask God why. You were there, or you heard, or you know what was said. Every second of silence just re-kills the dead. If you know what happened out on Bunker Hill, don't let Matthew fade like a chill. He was more than a rumor and more than a name. Let the truth break free and put an end to this game. Someone out there holds the key. Open up the lock and set his spirit free. You can lie, you can run, but you can never hide. This is Justice After Dark, and I'm keeping Matthew's memory alive. Matthew Hoy, a son, a friend, another life stolen. This ain't over, cause justice is rolling. If you saw something, say something. Do the right thing, let him rest in peace as we let the truth sing. Justice for Matthew.
Ladies and gentlemen, sorry about the little technical difficulties. This is new. I'm not familiar on this platform, but anyhow, welcome to Justice After Dark. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tim Miller, a 22-year police veteran who's held every rank, from the rank of patrolman to corporal to sergeant to detective to lieutenant to captain to assistant chief of police and the chief of police. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that qualifies me as an expert in law enforcement, don't you think? I've seen the system from inside, behind the curtain, folks. I've seen it all, the good, the bad, the ugly, the corrupt. And now I'm fortunate enough to lead you people, a group of truth seekers that are determined to expose what others choose to ignore or bury. You see, this isn't just a show that we're creating here on YouTube. This is a mission much bigger than what we initially thought it would ever be. You see, Justice After Dark to me is more than a name. It's where the silence ends and the truth begins. So tonight I want to talk to you about a young gentleman by the name of Matthew Hoy. And Matthew was a name that was not familiar to me when I was chief of police in Sunbury, Pennsylvania. In fact, Matthew only became on my radar after that reporter that I don't really care for in Sunbury, who acted like he was my friend until it was politically expedient for him not to be so, turned his back on me for political reasons. But this ain't about that reporter. This is about Matthew Hoy. So let's get right into it. Matthew Hoy. Was it a suspicious death or an unsolved homicide? That's the question, folks. Did something unexpected happen and did panic ensue? Or was this an intentional murder that was covered in accelerant hiding in plain sight? See, Matthew was just 20 years old on the early morning hours of May 7th, 1994, when his body was found beyond recognition in the back seat of his mother's car at a popular spot called Bunker Hill in Shamokin, Pennsylvania. But the flames just didn't destroy the evidence in this case. They ignited decades of questions that have been unanswered. The question is why, folks? Why are these questions not answered? Because this is not rocket science. This is police investigation 101. So what really happened on that fateful night? Did Matthew get too intoxicated? And was Matthew simply sleeping it off in the back of his mother's car, parked along Bunker Hill after a night of smoking, drinking, partying? Perhaps did a passing thunderstorm cause his vehicle to spontaneously combust after being struck by lightning? That's an interesting theory, isn't it? You know that old Justice After Dark here don't like the word theory. In fact, I can't stand the word theory because theories are garbage. It's what police without a clue do. They operate off of theories. Theories lead to nowhere. Nowhere leads to nowhere. Did a spaceship come down from planet Zatar and shoot Matthew's vehicle with a laser beam because young Matthew refused to join the spaceship? Or is it likely, possible, or even probable that Matthew was beaten unconscious and placed inside that car and then set ablaze? I think of all the scenarios that I just put on the table, I think the last seems to make the most sense, does it not? But the question I have for you people is this. See, this is a cold case. This is a case where the police said that all leads ran cold. If that's the case, then how did I come up with information that seems to contradict that statement? And I have a question for all of you out there watching, especially you from the coal region. Who was that man seen filling up those gas containers full of kerosene at the bottom of the hill? That's right, folks. A man was seen filling several containers full of kerosene at the bottom of Bunker Hill just before Matthew's car was lit on fire. Now, is that a coincidence, or would the FBI call that a fucking clue? Who was it that disappeared down Bunker Hill just before the responding fire department and emergency services vehicles began to make their way to the blazing inferno that would be discovered to contain Matthew Hoy's badly burned and unrecognizable body? And why are there rumors out here swirling about fights, jealousy, and rejected homosexual advances? Folks, I want you to keep in mind the last thing that I just said. Why is there rumor circulating about rejection in regards to some homosexual advances? Because I think that's quite damn important. So what exactly happened to Matthew between the hours of 5:30 p.m. on May 6th and approximately 05:42 hours on May 7th? Because at 5:30 p.m., Matthew was seen at a local bank. In fact, he's on camera at a local bank. And just several hours later, in the early morning hours, Matthew was no longer on planet Earth. He was burned badly alive in his mother's vehicle. But folks, it gets worse. Did Matthew remain on Bunker Hill the entire time, like police and the coroner would like you to believe? Or was he transported back to his vehicle by a neighbor or someone he thought was a friend? Or was he alive, unconscious, or dead upon being placed into the back seat, folks, the back seat of his mother's vehicle? You see, if Matthew was merely just sleeping one off on Bunker Hill, it's highly possible and quite probable that he probably would have just reclined himself in the front seat, because it's probably more comfortable in the front seat of a vehicle than it is in the back. So I find it highly unlikely that Matthew would have exited the vehicle, walked around to the passenger side, flipped the seat up, and then climbed in the back, leaving that seat in the flipped up position. Did Matthew ever make it to his apartment that night, where everyone on Bunker Hill that was there was going to go for an after party and celebrate because it was a weekend? Folks, this isn't rocket science. This is called investigation. This isn't just a cold case. This is a smoldering mystery that's wrapped in silence. And someone out there holds the match that's going to light this entire thing on fire and smoke one of these sumbitches out. And I think you know who holds that match. He's talking to you right now in this camera. See, we here at Justice After Dark are about to use our own accelerant. and we're going to smoke us out the truth. So let's examine the facts and ask the questions that the local authorities never asked. And they sure as fuck didn't answer them, did they? So is this a suspicious death or is it a homicide? Or are they still not sure? Because last time I checked, Matthew is still dead. So whether it's a suspicious death or an unsolved homicide, that's for you to decide. Feel free to ask questions at any time during this live. And if you know something, for God's sakes, say something. Because I will not let any information go unnoticed. No rumor go unchecked. No stone will be left unturned. I promise you that. One thing people know about me is I'll rip the goddamn walls down if I have to find the truth. I go where the truth is and wherever it hides. And I do not care if I hurt people's feelings or stomp on their toes. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to find the truth. See, silence just protects the guilty. And here at Justice After Dark, I like to think I speak for the dead. So let's get straight to it, folks. Here's what I know about the Matthew Hoy case. And I want to share it with you. So we know several things here. We know that on the early morning hours of May 7th, 2014, or correction, 1994, firefighters were called to the scene of a vehicle fire on Bunker Hill, which is a section of Shamokin that is known for shenanigans. People would go there, they would smoke pot, drink beer underage, party, have a little fun, and then they would go about their business. But something happened on May 7th, 1994, folks, that changed Bunker Hill forever. And I listened to some podcasts, and one of them, the coroner, Richard Ulrich, was interviewed by that reporter that I don't like. And he asked them the standard questions that I would expect the reporter to ask. It was the answers that were given that were surprising to me. Let me break it down for you. So the coroner reports that he arrived at the scene of what was a terrible, terrible car fire. But what he walked up upon was something that he, being the coroner, let me repeat that. What he walked up upon was something he, being the coroner, was not prepared for. What he saw inside that vehicle was a man who was burned so bad it was beyond recognition. Matthew would not be able to be identified for at least 6 months due to the extensive damage that was done to his body. You see, the body had gotten so hot from the flames that there wasn't much to see, folks. And I know this from personal experience because I told you about the day that I will never forget. I just wrote about it last night in my book. January 12th, 2014, I walked up to a vehicle that was ablaze, only it was at the hands of another police officer driving 101 miles an hour. And that vehicle was clipped in the rear end, which made it to a 360, which sheared off a telephone pole, which punctured the gasoline tank, which started the leak. And as the vehicle came at rest against a nearby building, the telephone pole that had fallen, the wires had arced. It ignited the gasoline, which lit a trail all the way to the vehicle, causing an explosion in the gas tank. You see, folks, this coroner described the body of young Matthew Hoy, and he wasn't ready for what his eyes saw. I wasn't ready either on January 12, 2014. And I can tell you that nobody poured gasoline all over that car. But the memories that I have of that night, January 12, 2014, will stay with me forever. They're scars that I wear to this day. And it was the effects of that night that would cause me to undergo one of the worst character assassinations, probably in Pennsylvania political history. And here we have a coroner, a well-respected man, who was so overwhelmed with the sight of young Matthew Hoy, whose body was so badly damaged that they couldn't tell if he was stabbed. They couldn't tell if he was shot. They couldn't tell much of anything other than he was inside a car that was a blazing inferno. Folks, his body was burnt so bad that it took 6 months for his family to finally receive confirmation that it was him inside that vehicle. How is that possible? Because you see, when a vehicle burns, every vehicle back in 1994 ran on gasoline and had a tank full of it, unless they were running on empty, maybe not so much, but cars ran on gasoline in 1994. We didn't have all this solar bullshit out here floating around for these soy boys, did we? No. Every vehicle on the road had an accelerant called gasoline. But what the coroner couldn't understand is how could the fire have been so hot, and how could it have done so much damage? There had to be an accelerant. There had to be an accelerant. Well, he's right. There had to be an accelerant. And one crucial fact is this, that every car ran on gasoline, did it not? So there's one potential source of an accelerant. It was in the tank of Matthew's vehicle. So if that was the only accelerant that was on or in Matthew's vehicle, it means one would only need a fuse to ignite it. And anything could be used for a fuse to light a gas tank on fire, folks. Use your imagination. You could use a piece of rolled up newspaper like the Daily Item. Would be a great fire starter. All you'd have to do is stick it in the gas tank and take your Bic from your right front pocket that you use to light up your cigarette and light that newspaper, and within seconds you have a blazing inferno. But there's a problem with that, folks. And the problem is this. Remember, I told you I don't operate off of theories. I operate off of evidence. So I'm going to tell you the evidence in this case. The evidence in this case demonstrate that a man by the name of Pat, was observed at the bottom of Bunker Hill filling up cans full of kerosene just before his vehicle was seen driving up Bunker Hill. And right before the fire department received a call from somebody who saw the blaze up on the hill and called the fire department, the same vehicle that was seen filling the tanks for the cans full of kerosene was seen coming down the hill. So the last car seen going up and the last car seen coming down was the same fucking vehicle. And the person inside this vehicle was observed filling cans full of an accelerant. Folks, the FBI would call that a fucking clue. Is that not enough evidence to go on? It sure as fuck would have been for this guy right here. I would have had my boot on that guy's neck within 30 minutes of receiving that piece of information. And it gets worse, folks. It gets worse. Because not only would this individual be seen filling these gasoline cans full of kerosene, there's a small detail that nobody wants to talk about. And that small detail is this. After talking to Matthew's family, it appears that Matthew only had one fucking sneaker on his foot when he was burned inside that car. So where in the hell was his other sneaker? One has to wonder, would Matthew really put on one sneaker and drive his ass on up the Bunker Hill to smoke him a little pot, drink a little beer, and party with his friends? Or would he probably have noticed that he was missing one shoe and probably would have put it on before he left the house? The FBI would call that a fucking clue, would they not? What happened to Matthew's other shoe? Well, let me tell you what happened to his other shoe. According to sources, Matthew's other shoe would be found in the downstairs apartment of the same gentleman who was observed filling the goddamn cans full of kerosene, and the man who was the last man seen coming down Bunker Hill and the last man seen going up Bunker Hill. Now, the FBI would call that a fucking clue, would they not? How did Matthew's shoe that matched the one he was wearing in the vehicle end up in the downstairs apartment of the complex that he lived in Pat's apartment? How is that possible, people? You see, we don't have a person of interest. We have a fucking suspect. We have a suspect and a potential. No, it's not a potential. It's a fucking homicide. Let's call it what it is. It's a homicide. These facts are so sick, people. How this case is still sitting in a cold case file, I'm going to tell you how it's still sitting there. Because this case changed hands 3 fucking times. 3 different investigators in that police department. 3. Since 1994. 3 times. Probably more than that. That's all that the reports we can find is it changed hands 3 times. Did those officers pass off the information each time that case was sent to the next guy? Now, I know the one guy that was investigating the case is like 109 fucking years old. He'd been on the job for like 49 years. Kudos to you, sir, but you may want to go to Walmart and put an application in. Your expiration date has long been expired. So it would appear that the police identified this person that I just spoke of, and they interviewed him at least 3 times. 3 times. And at some point throughout their investigation, they became interested in his Buick. Or it might have been an Oldsmobile. I don't really want to look at the papers. Because I want to talk to you people. So if they didn't think that this person had something to do with Matthew's murder, why would they talk to him 3 times on 3 different occasions? And it appears that they became interested in his vehicle. And they wanted his vehicle so bad, but they couldn't find it. And it took almost 2 years for them to track his vehicle down. And they found it in a junkyard in Pottsville, Pennsylvania, where it was fixing to be crushed. And the evidence was going to be destroyed forever. So we have to wonder, was this vehicle no longer operable? Is that why this vehicle was taken to the junkyard to be crushed and scrapped? Did the frequent visits from the police conducting the investigation tip him off that perhaps he was now not a person of interest, but a suspect? So, why get rid of your vehicle? Well, we know it was the last vehicle seen going up and the last vehicle seen coming down. And the owner was observed filling canisters full of what appeared to be kerosene. Why is that important, folks? Because during a coroner's inquest, it was brought out that when they swabbed young Matthew's lungs, they determined that his lungs contained an accelerant, likely kerosene, inside of his lungs, folks, which means that young Matthew Hoy was alive when he burned inside that fucking car. He was alive, likely unconscious, but he was alive. And I ask you this question. Give me one person with the balls to commit suicide by fire. I'm not aware of a single case in the history of the world where a man lit himself on fire to commit suicide. So the police tracked down this vehicle at this junkyard in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. And they tear the back seats out of that son of a bitch. And folks, what they found in that back seat, you can't make this up. You see, when they, according to the family, sprayed it with luminol, the back seat lit up like a Christmas tree. And there was blood everywhere in the back seat of that man's car. There was so much blood in the back seat of that man's car that they sent the seats to California. But when the test came back, they couldn't determine that it was Matthew's blood because, well, let's face it, DNA back in those days ain't what DNA is in these days. See, you could probably send those seats away tomorrow to another laboratory with today's technology, And it's not only likely, but it's probable that you could potentially determine whether or not that was Matthew's blood. Now, I suppose if you are one of these cops or one of these prosecutors like Tony Bologna-Levitch that I dealt with in the Bart Miller investigation, there was a obstructionist the whole fucking way, would probably want the officers to rule out that perhaps he didn't go hunting and shoot a deer and load the deer in the back seat of his car to transport it home so that he could eat it. Only a fucking idiot would come up with some bullshit like that. So, folks, the question that comes to mind to me is quite simple. Where's the crime scene? Where's the crime scene? Was the crime scene Matthew's vehicle? Or is the crime scene the location where the other shoe was found? You see, the evidence that I just talked about, and the evidence that I've become aware of through documents and podcasts, lead me to believe something much different. I don't believe Matthew stayed on Bunker Hill the entire time because they were supposed to go to Matthew's apartment for a party. And the only thing that would explain why he had one shoe on and the other was in the downstairs apartment of his neighbor who was driving that Oldsmobile that the police found blood in the back seat of would lead anybody that has a brain cell in their head to wonder if perhaps Matthew was there and was transported from either his apartment or his downstairs neighbor's apartment and staged on Bunker Hill to throw the police off of the murder scene or the assault, whatever it was that took place. Something, you can be sure of this, something that rendered young Matthew unconscious occurred somewhere. And if I'm operating off of the possibilities or the probabilities, it is more highly possible and very probable that whatever led to Matthew Hoy being unconscious occurred either in his apartment or the apartment downstairs where his other shoe was found. So we have to ask ourselves this: did somebody panic? Did somebody load Matthew up and take him to his vehicle on Bunker Hill where he left it? Open up the passenger side door, flip up the seat, and put Matthew in the back shortly before he doused the vehicle with kerosene and lit it on fire, because there was likely injuries on Matthew's body that the suspect didn't want the police to find. And whatever the injuries were, folks, would have had to have been severe to cause the amount of blood that's being described on these seats in this car that was found in the fucking junkyard in Pottsville. Folks, this is disgusting. This is disgusting. It really is. I believe the police have a suspect in the murder of Matthew Hoy. But I think we have Northumberland County politics at play here. I think we have a overcautious prosecutor was worried about being able to determine the cause of death. Well, can a man survive a blazing inferno? No. If we can prove that a man was observed filling gasoline cans full of an accelerant, Matthew's car was full of an accelerant, his lungs were full of an accelerant, folks, that's murder. That's murder. Now, there's a few questions that need to be answered in this case to move it forward. Any investigator would want to know where the crime scene is. Because one thing I know is I don't care if it's been 10 years, 20 years, or 30 fucking years. I can tell you that after 28 years, I found the crime scene in the Barbara Miller case. I said, after 28 years, I found the crime scene in the Barbara Miller case. I wrote a fucking song about it. I wasn't saying things just to say things. I don't care how long it's been. Evidence is always left behind. Always. All it's going to take is one person that knows what happened, either on Bunker Hill that night or at the after party, that it was either at Matthew's apartment or at the apartment below Matthew's. Mr. Pat's, I'll call him. Now, here's one thing I know. I talked about this case on another platform, and I asked a question about a fireman named Art who apparently was sexually abusing some young men in the area. And I believe that it's highly possible, in fact, it's probable, that old Art sexually abused Mr. Pat. And I think maybe Mr. Pat, maybe, did he come on to Matthew? And Matthew shunned him? Because, folks, burning somebody alive in a vehicle is very violent. The amount of blood that was described in the back seat of that car was very violent. Something very violent occurred. And one thing I can tell you about homosexuals that commit homicides is they can be very violent. So if I'm looking at a profile of a potential killer, I have to entertain the possibility that the offender might have been a little light in the loafers, if you know what I'm saying. And I'm not trying to degrade the person. I'm just trying to be honest and tell the truth from somebody who is an expert in the field of law enforcement. That's right, folks. I just said it. I'm an expert in the field of law enforcement. You know why? Because I've held every position possible. I've done everything there is to do. I've got nothing left to prove. I am a fucking expert in law enforcement in all facets. I have commanded an entire criminal investigation division. I have investigated some of the most difficult cases. In fact, one of the most difficult cases ever. There's only been two of them in the United States and one in the UK. where a woman was fed through a wood chipper. Folks, did you hear what I just said? I said there's only been 2 cases in the United States. Hella Craft, Barbara Miller, and a third in the United Kingdom. I'm going to call myself an expert, and I don't care if people like it. Folks, there's not a lack of evidence in this case. There's a lack of follow-through. I just provided you with enough information. And like I told you, I don't operate off of theories. I follow the evidence. The evidence took us to Bunker Hill. The evidence then took us to Matthew's apartment on Sunbury Street, potentially to the downstairs apartment. Then it took us to Pottsville. Then it took us to California, where they couldn't determine if it was Matthew's blood or not. And we know that the coroner said that the body was so badly burned and destroyed that one of the first things he said, folks, is he couldn't tell if he had any stab wounds. Why? Why was that the first thing the coroner mentioned? Kind of odd, don't you think? Why didn't he say there wasn't any gun wounds, any gunshots? He jumped straight to stab wounds. Why? I'd like to know why. I believe that my instincts are pretty good. I've done the victimology on Matthew Hoy. And by all accounts, Matthew was a good boy. He was a good young man just trying to find his way in life. He had a job. He was well liked. He had a lot of friends. Didn't have a lot of enemies. Yet there was rumors of drug activity and the fucking skinheads being involved. Let me tell you what I think about that, because you're going to get a kick out of this. As I was digging through this case, taking a look, you remember that asshole that I call B.O.B, right? Yeah, well, he surfaced in this case. He surfaced in this case. And I'm going to read it to you right now because it's kind of important for you to understand why these police were following theories when all they had to do was follow the evidence that was in plain sight. This is from a newspaper article, folks. An investigation into whether the death was related to the murder of Conrad Dumchok of Coltmont. Now, Conrad Dumchok was a man who was murdered. It was a robbery by the Marinelli brothers, Kevin and Mark, and another young man. Another young man. And that other young man is very similar to a man that we know and have become accustomed to his name, Robert Hummel, who was a corrupt and polluted witness that was used to convict Scott Schaefer and Billy Hendricks for a murder they had nothing to do with. And after 17 years, when Rob Hummel finally came clean and said that he lied and that he was pulled inside of a room and shown photographs and crime scene photos and was coached by none other than B.O.B. I about puked when I found what I found in this case. An investigation into whether the death was related to the murder of Conrad Dumchak of Coltmont was conducted due to one of the perpetrators' involvement in the separate car fire prior to his arrest. But then District Attorney B.O.B. Sakavage found no hard evidence to link the two and ruled the two cases unrelated. Let's dig a little deeper, folks. You see, the Dumchak murder occurred in April of 1997. Matthew Hoy was killed in May of 1997. And Kevin Marinelli, during this burglary or robbery, they were trying to steal some stereo equipment, shot Mr. Dumchak one time in the eye and once right between the eyes. And it's rumored that the Marinelli brothers were skinheads and that potentially the skinheads were involved in the murder of Matthew Hoy. Now, I don't have access to all the police reports, folks. But what I do have access to is common sense. I can tell you that I see no connection whatsoever of the Marinelli brothers to the murder of Matthew Hoy. I see one man and one man only. Now, he may be a skinhead, at least according to his Facebook page. His hair looks a lot like mine. Now, mine is skinned for probably a different reason, probably due to the chemotherapy and the fact that I lost my hair with my illness. But so there's a friend of the Marinelli brothers by the name of Nathan Regal. And Nathan Regal apparently was cut a deal by B.O.B. And the deal was later ripped off the table. Similar to the way the deal was ripped off the table once B.O.B. corrupt and polluted Mr. Hummel and got the convictions on Scott Schaefer and Billy Hendricks with zero evidence. So Mr. Marinelli filed what's called a Post-Conviction Relief Act hearing, which is what Scott Schaefer filed, and that's what ultimately set him free. And it states this: the prosecution failed to disclose the terms of the deal between the Commonwealth and Regal. Marinelli cites the Post-Conviction Relief Act testimony of B.O.B., now Judge Sakavage, which I won't refer to him as judge because he doesn't deserve that title. And this is what B.O.B. said. When you're talking to individuals that are mostly strangers, you want to make sure you're getting accurate information. And you warn them, certainly, that you expect them to tell the truth. Let me read that to you again, folks. When you're talking to individuals that are mostly strangers, you want to make sure you're getting accurate information. And you warn them, certainly, that you expect them to tell the truth. Well, 9 out of 10 people lie to me every day. So does that mean that I'm supposed to walk up to people that I don't know and warn them? You either tell me the truth or else. Because I'm B.O.B. I was a state champion wrestler. And I'm a judge. What the fuck does that have to do with anything? So let me read you a little more disgusting B.O.B facts. The following statements were made by the prosecutor. Two witnesses came into court and did not identify the defendant. Were they scared to face him? Were they scared face to face? If they were both telling the truth about that, the description, why would one say bald and the other say blonde? Were they scared? Did they fear the possibility of what could happen? Marinelli's counsel then objected. The court sustained the objection, meaning they upheld it, and instructed the prosecutor to focus on the testimony. See, B.O.B knew exactly what he was doing. He was tainting the fucking jury. Getting shit in that's not supposed to get in so he could railroad these people. And the Marinelli brothers were fucking murderers. But standing on business and the principles that I stand upon, it still doesn't make it right. Because this is the second example, only this time he got it right and convicted somebody who was actually guilty of the crime. So when the prosecutor stated the witnesses were afraid to testify against the appellant, he created a preconceived notion in the process of deliberations that the defendant had tampered with or threatened the witnesses. The comments were heard and could not be erased from the jurors' minds. Folks, that's how justice is tainted. That's how cases are tainted by corrupt prosecutors like B.O.B or Mr. Baloney Matalevich. So, folks, as you can see here, I just gave probably more information than anybody that's ever covered this case has given. Some of this information came to me through the Facebook page months and months and months ago. I'd have to dig back through thousands of messages. But I can tell you somebody came forward and gave information. Some of it I got from the family, who had to listen to the investigators tell them about all this evidence that they did nothing with and continue to do nothing with. The way I see this case, folks, it's very simple. If this case were to get turned over to the Pennsylvania State Police, not the Attorney General's office, do not waste your fucking time going to the Attorney General's office. We found that out the hard way in the Barb Miller case, didn't we, folks? See, I talked to Arpad Voss on the phone today about my book and about a couple other things that are spinning in the background. And I asked Arpad, because I'm fixing to write that chapter of the book, and I said, how sure are you? He said, I'm 100% sure. Folks, when I look in your eyes through this camera and I tell you that Barb is home, she's home. You can believe all the newspaper articles you want. You can believe everything that they printed, all the lies. Or you can believe the one person that's remained consistent throughout the whole entire thing. That's why I changed the name of the book from Concrete Justice to Justice After Dark, because this book is more than just about concrete. This book is about a character assassination that affected the outcome of a murder case. That caused me to have to jump through hurdles that nobody should have ever had to jump through. That caused me to have to explain myself over and over again as to why I'm no longer a policeman. It's because I choose not to be. But I'll tell you what I will do. If there's any police departments out there with a cold case and you can't handle it, if you don't want to call in the Pennsylvania State Police, I will drive my ass down to Harrisburg tomorrow. I will reactivate my MOPEC certification card, and I will be a policeman by 4 o'clock. And you can hire me part-time on your police department to work your cold case homicide for $100 an hour. And I will solve your case, and I'll bring your missing people home. Or you can choose to stay the course and continue doing what you're doing and lying to these families. Because you and I both know that you ain't lifting a finger in these cases. And you could care less. Folks, this is the Chief, and I'm out.